Hi everybody, welcome to Life, Loss and Hope. I've had many conversations about the grief people are feeling currently, and in particular messages from those who are really struggling with their own bereavement. One particular gentleman has given me his permission to read his thoughts, expressing his emotional pain. My personal grief at the passing of my wife since last year has never been far away. I must admit I've been experiencing tearful episodes at some point on most days. However, since last Thursday at the death of the Queen, I have experienced my grief now at an unimaginable higher level. It started with the first pictures coming in from Scotland, and the feelings have increased to the point now where I have to limit my television viewing, particularly seeing people's reactions when they pass the coffin lying in state. I have asked myself why this is, and the only thing I can attribute it to is the subconscious mind. All I know is that I am dreading, to some extent, next Monday's funeral, when I'm sure that I will struggle to keep my emotions in check and under control. And this is an honest reflection, Sarah, of how I'm currently feeling. We've rarely seen the global response that we have witnessed over the past week in the aftermath of the announcement of our Queen Elizabeth's death. They were already there in their hundreds by the time the news was actually announced. The Union Jack lowered to half-mast, causing an emotional rendition of God Save the Queen to begin. Within hours, the crowd had multiplied into the thousands as tearful mourners flocked to Buckingham Palace to collectively grieve the passing of the Queen. This news shouldn't have come as a surprise. The Queen had been absent from several events in recent months owing to ill health. However, the cheerful photographs that we all loved only days earlier with Elizabeth Truss, the newly appointed Prime Minister, seemed incongruous with the news of her death, leaving us all with an overriding sentiment of surprise and shock. Many have expressed that they simply can't believe that she's gone. After all, only months earlier we celebrated her Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. It's no wonder people have become accustomed to her being a stable, consistent influence in our lives. But her death marks a period of change for the nation. Just one more destabilising factor in an already turbulent year filled with war, political upheaval, climate anxiety and economic crisis. As a society, we have experienced an enormous quantity of loss in recent years, and unfortunately for many people, the death of the Queen will create a further feeling of destabilisation. Indeed, more than simply a moment in history, the death of the monarch could signal significant change in our national psyche and in its mental health. And with the viewing figures for the Queen's funeral expected to eclipse that of Princess Diana's, which was watched by 2.5 billion people worldwide, the impact of the monarch's death on our mental well-being is anticipated to be significant. So what do we actually know about collective grief, and what's the best way to cope with it? Collective grief is when we share a loss broadly and communally rather than individually. This shared grief can occur for a number of reasons, such as the loss of a public figure, the consequence of a natural disaster, or the aftermath of a terrorist attack. For example, in recent years, we've experienced collective grief here in the UK after tragedies such as Princess Diana's death, the Grenfell Tower fire, and the Manchester arena bombing. During the pandemic, many of us felt a collective grief, not only for the loss of loved ones, but also for the loss of our freedom and life as we knew it. The recent death of Queen Elizabeth is set to evoke a similar outpouring of grief, mourning the passing of a well-loved monarch, but also a recognisable figurehead who has been a constant in many of our lives. Some people are feeling confused about mourning someone they've never met. It's definitely normal to feel the deep loss of someone who you have not known personally or even met, because grief is ultimately about a connection. So it doesn't have to be an in-person connection or interaction. It doesn't matter if it's a celebrity, a member of the royal family, a politician. All we need is to feel a connection with that person. And I'm sure we've all felt a connection at some level with the Queen, who was present in our family life, Christmas dinners, and I can remember there was the roast turkey and then always the Queen's speech, which we watched with my grandmothers. Just one of our family traditions. We chart our own lives through significant moments in history. We remember where we were and what we were doing and what we heard when that particular person died. And when we lose that anchoring figure in our own personal narrative, it can be emotionally unsettling. And into the equation, we're also living through an already emotionally charged time, a mood resulting from the emotional aftermath of the last few years in the pandemic and the looming environmental, political and economic crises we're seeing. One major issue we're all seeing at the moment is what we call disenfranchised grief. This is a grief which comes from a loss which is not acknowledged or given public recognition. We have a lot of disenfranchised grief in this country following the last few years, where people weren't allowed to properly grieve the loss of a loved one because of restrictions. Young students who were not able to sit exams or have leaving proms or ceremonies. Many everyday losses that were invisible and yet created an accumulation of pain and suffering. While for some this can result in a resentment even at the death of the monarch receiving this kind of memorial that others were refused, the collective grief arising from the nation mourning together can also provide an outlet for unacknowledged grief, along with a sense of unity in a shared bereavement, which was obviously missing for many during the pandemic experience. A question you may be asking yourself is, why do I feel so upset or destabilised? And there are good reasons why you might feel more affected by this news than you anticipated, whether you consider yourself a royalist or not. Firstly, as I've said, the Queen's presence has been subconsciously part of our daily life for 70 years. Every time we post a letter, she's on the stamp. Every time we hand over cash, she's on our money. We even see her beaming into our front rooms on Christmas Day when she delivered that famous speech. Whatever people's opinions of the monarchy, the Queen, who reigned for 70 years, she has been a really symbolic, important figure in our lives. And consequently, her brand has permeated our lives and our minds and our rituals. On some level, people feel like they have met her and shared something with her, which results in this feeling of connection, which is the key to grief. What's more, seeing the death of a well-loved figure can open the doors of our own losses and bring back unresolved grief, which we usually keep locked away. Significant deaths bring back memories of all of our other losses and bereavements, unleashing heightened emotions. The images of the coffin are a stark reminder of our own mortality and the mortality of our nearest and dearest loved ones, and can be very unsettling. It also can evoke a kind of anticipatory loss, heightening our awareness of the possibility of losing our loved ones in the not-so-distant future. As death has become the national focus, it reminds us it can happen to anyone at any time. Life is fragile and precious. And so how do we cope? Grief is a universal reaction that all humans are capable of feeling. It is normal, and it's the brain and body's way of coping in the response to shock. Grief experts say that it is natural, even though it feels incredibly painful, and is not necessarily a need for medication. Indeed, they say, to face the pain, be gentle on yourself, to talk and give yourself time can help. Finding a way to mark loss is really important. Grief is always unique and is unique to the relationship with the person that's died. So finding a way to honour that connection is important. There are obviously no set rules or the best way to do this. However, laying flowers, as we've seen, attending a memorial, sharing stories, writing letters are all ways which could help you articulate your grief. And keep in mind that the brain does not like change. Change brings uncertainty. So I try to seek solace and comfort in the areas of my life that are predictable and certain. Observing nature's seasons and cycles can be useful as a reminder that spring always follows winter and life always follows death. Find your circle of support. Not everybody will understand and experience collective grief, and their comments can be invalidating. So seek out and speak to others who feel the same way, where you can express your thoughts openly without judgment or ridicule. And talk about your own losses, the consequential emotions that have been resurfaced. Respect your feelings of grief, regardless of whether they are your own or someone else's. Understand that these emotions are valid. Accept those feelings are real and normal, and give yourself permission, as I've said, to talk about them, because it's all part of the natural grieving process. And finally, take comfort in knowing that all these feelings come from a place of connection and love. We are unified in collective grief and in sharing our pain and loss. And there is a bond of solidarity, respect and honour that we are truly blessed to be part of at this time in history. And as the Queen famously said herself, grief is the price we pay for love.